I first saw his work in the late 90s. My interest as a fisherman and also as a writer. This young whippersnapper from Yale was publishing books, and it was always impressive when you see an undergraduate at 19 books on the shelves, Barnes and Noble, all over independent bookstores. James Prosek wrote a book called Joe and Me, and he began it with these two sentences. It's not like I had never done it before. In fact, poaching had almost become an art to me. In this book, James unfolds the relationship between his 15-year-old self and an old ranger who caught him fishing on Posted Reservoir. James is the student, Joe Haynes the mentor. It's a beautiful relationship, and the resulting book, a beautiful tale of friendship. I can't help but think of James's paintings and books as the fine art of poaching, or perhaps the finest art of poaching. What he has given us since he was caught in that teenage indiscretion has been served primarily on the canvas and on the page, not on the plate. He used the magic of language and paint to capture a moment in nature. It's been said of his paintings of fish that what he catches on canvas looks like they might come alive and flop right out of the frame. Annie Dillard wrote that beauty and grace are performed whether or not we sense them, whether we're not there to see them. The least we can do is to try to be there. James Prosek has made it his life to try to be there at these moments of beauty and grace. And he captures them and allows us to experience them through his extraordinary skill as a painter and the keen eye of an observer. From his first book, published when still a student at Yale, Trout, an Illustrated History, which is a collection of watercolors of more than 70 North American trout, to his recent Wall of Silhouettes in the atrium of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology in Ithaca, he has displayed his earnest devotion to the art of observing and cataloging nature. James Prosek's watercolors in 13 books are tributes to our natural world. His work gives to us, at least to those of us who long to repose in what has become nature's diminishing landscape, some stable moments of reflection and awe. He first roamed the woods near his childhood home in Connecticut, and then the world, from Cape Cod to Cape Verde, capturing all that swims, or soars, or slithers, or stamps, or stands, or stampedes. He's been described as a scientist, philosopher, jungle whacker, musician, lyricist, anthropologist, filmmaker, and prodigious note-taker. We're proud to welcome them all here in the body of James Prosek, this year's Prince Lecturer.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm usually in bed at this hour, so this is a bonus. It's nice to be thrust in front of a school full of bright young people. So thanks for having me, and thank you for that very nice introduction. I apologize to anybody who was here last night because the presentation is going to be pretty similar, but bear with me. Anyway, as Larry mentioned, I make my living as an artist and a writer. That changes from day to day. I'm not sure what those things mean all the time. But I make things, I paint things, I make three-dimensional objects. I try to sell them to make a living. My job doesn't have any particular structure to it. I kind of make it up every day. And sometimes that's refreshing, sometimes it's challenging, but it's kind of what I've done ever since I graduated from college. A lot of the root of my work is about an appreciation of nature, and the source material is the stuff that I see around my home and on my travels. I grew up in southwestern Connecticut in a town called Easton, and I still live 2 houses away from the house where I grew up. So this place where I grew up was very special to me, and I have a very strong sense of place. So I've seen this landscape change over the 30-something years that I've been there and had my eyes open. Easton is different from other towns in the area where I live. We're about 60 miles from New York City, and that there's 4 drinking water reservoirs, and there's a lot of open land around the reservoirs that they preserve to filter the water for drinking for mostly the city of Bridgeport and Fairfield. And because there's all this open space, I grew up adjacent to one of these reservoirs, and there's thousands of acres of open land, and most of them have no trespassing signs around them, so the public's not allowed. But to a young a person who liked nature, those no trespassing signs were like welcome here signs. And once we were on the other side of them, it didn't really matter because you couldn't read them, so we thought we were safe. But this man, as Larry mentioned, Joe Haynes, is a game warden who worked for the Bridgeport Hydraulic Company. They patrol the reservoirs to make sure people aren't swimming in them or peeing in them or doing things that they shouldn't do to the drinking water. And I got caught fishing illegally by him when I was 14, and he became a very important kind of mentor figure in my life. My father introduced me to nature through his love of birds. He grew up in a suburb of Sao Paulo, Brazil, a big city in South America, and he used to capture birds alive as a kid and put them in cages on the veranda of their home. And when he came to this country, to New York, when he was a kid, he brought that love of birds with him. And he used to take me for walks in the woods and teach me the names of the birds and the trees and things. And he used to bring home volumes of Audubon's paintings of the birds of North America home from the local library. Are you guys familiar with Audubon? Have you heard that name? Probably many of you are. Audubon would, before all the birds of North America had been cataloged, he had this idea to go out and paint pictures of all of them. He traveled across the country with a gun, which was his primary tool for collecting them. He would shoot the birds and then wire them up in these kind of contorted compositions and on a board with needles sticking out of it. And he would paint them in life, right? In death, actually, just after they were killed. So they still had that sort of glow of life over them. And he would paint them as quickly as he could while they still had their living colors, because a lot of the colors fade as they die. But these paintings, for me as a kid, really captured my imagination. And I loved pouring through these books and seeing all these living, ecstatic, and colorful creatures in all these strange compositions with foliage behind them. And so those were my first paintings, were copies of Audubon's. It's a really great way to learn how to draw is by copying the artists that you really like. So I started drawing birds, and this, as I mentioned, is Joe Haynes. He's got an eel on his plate. He exposed me to a lot of things in nature that I wouldn't have ordinarily seen, but maybe later today in some of the classes I'll talk to you guys about eels. But I spent 12 years writing a book about eels. They're really fascinating fish. Most fish that you may be familiar with that migrate, like salmon, spawn in freshwater and live their adult lives in saltwater. So they lay their eggs in rivers and streams, and then they migrate out to the sea to feed. And then they come back up in freshwater a couple of years later to reproduce. They call those fish anadromous fish. Eels are the only fish that do the opposite. So they live in all the rivers around here, most of their adult lives. And then when they're ready to lay their eggs, they go way out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and they spawn in the sea, lay their eggs, die. The young come back up the rivers and live their adult lives. So it's the opposite migration of most other migratory fish. They call it a catadromous fish. And one of the things that really interested me about the eel the most is that humans have never witnessed eels reproducing in the ocean. So we don't have the technology to track them out there and see them actually reproducing. So it's kind of, I think, nice that there's some things that humans can't see. And the eels have been able to keep their reproductive history a mystery from humans. We know that they reproduce out there because they found little babies drifting in the surface of the ocean. if you're interested in eels, we did a documentary for Nature, this PBS program that you can watch on the internet called The Mystery of Eels. Anyway, I'll start showing some pictures. I like fish for some reason. I started painting birds, and then a friend of mine at school, when I was 9 years old, a fellow 9-year-old, started taking me fishing, and it was a kind of a revelation to me that you could just throw something attached to a line into this mysterious element that you couldn't see what was underneath the surface, and pull a living thing out of that other element. My friend Stephen was kind of a troublemaker. He was the worst kid in school. The teachers hated him. He was a complete terror. But when he was out in nature, he was really kind of an angel. He was very calm, and he could function very well, and was very skilled. And he taught me a lot of things about catching fish. And one day he took me to a little stream that comes into the reservoir behind my house called the Mill River. And I caught my first native brook trout in this stream. Many of you have probably seen trout, but they're very, very beautiful, colorful fish. They almost look like tropical fish. In these streams that are very dark and tannic from the water sort of stained from all the leaves and the roots of trees that steep in the water. But in this sort of dark, mysterious element live these really beautiful, colorful fish that I completely fell in love with. And my paintings sort of turned from birds to fish. I'm not sure why most of my career, as it has been, I've been interested in these two creatures that live in other elements, the air and then underwater, places that we can't really live. But maybe I'm just interested in thinking about what living in those other elements might mean. But recently I did a series of paintings of large fish. This is a swordfish. The original painting is about that size, maybe even a little bit bigger. But I wanted to paint, you see fish and pictures of birds in field guides or in books, and they're really kind of small, and you don't get a sense of how monumental some of these fish are. But the fish in our oceans that we're losing, there's a lot of overfishing going on. Swordfish, bluefin tuna, blue marlin, they're really spectacular creatures. They call these big creatures in Africa like rhinos and elephants the charismatic megafauna. And these really are the charismatic megafauna of our oceans. So I wanted to paint them not at a size that would fit in a book, but at life size, so that if I exhibited them, people could see how gigantic and beautiful some of these fish are. Because when you go to the fish market and you buy swordfish, you just get a chunk of it, and you don't really get any idea of what this fish really looks like. So that was part of the idea, was to paint not just a fish to represent a whole species, but an individual fish that I had a personal experience with. So each one of these fish I traveled around the world to see. And the moment that I wanted to paint them was when they first left their element, the water, and entered ours, the air, when they first were sparkling in the sun and showing all their beautiful colors. But also at the moment when they're dying. And that's the moment that's most sort of relevant to us as humans that eat them, and our legacy on this planet as predators that kill things to sustain ourselves, which is sad, but has been a necessary part of our evolution on the planet. This is me as a 5 or 6 year old with a dead warbler called the magnolia warbler. It flew into the picture window of our house. And my father wasn't afraid to sort of pick up dead things and put them in my hands. So I had nature, real nature available to me to draw from, but I also had nature in books that had already been processed by other artists that I was copying. And there was an interesting contrast between the two, I think. So I started painting trout, and my mission at 10 or 11 years old, I went to the local library looking for a book on the trout of North America, equivalent to what John James Audubon had done for birds. And I couldn't find one, so I thought at that age that I would try to put together a book on the trout of North America myself. And I started writing letters to departments of wildlife around the country and states where I thought that there might be native trout in mountain states with cold, clear water, because trout really like cold, running water. And I got a lot of really nice responses from biologists in different places like Nevada or Wyoming who studied a particular type of trout their entire lives. And I started to assemble a list of all the fish that I wanted to paint. And I by the time I was a freshman in college, I had enough information to do what I thought would be a book of the trout of North America. And I sent out 10 proposals for a book blindly to 10 publishers. And I was lucky enough to find somebody who was willing to publish the book. I was rejected from 9 of the 10 publishers, but then one of them agreed to do it, and it came out my junior year in college, and kind of changed my life because I was studying to become an architect, and if that publisher hadn't picked up the book, I would probably be an architect right now. My father always encouraged my artistic sort of yearnings, but he always said the artists starve and you can't be an artist for a living. So I was always very practical and pragmatic, and I thought, well, I'll have a profession like architecture, and I can do my art on the side. But having this book made me realize that maybe I could make my living doing the same thing that I've been doing since I was 5 years old, which was writing in my journal and making up stories and painting. But I guess the lesson there for fishermen would be, if you don't have your line in the water, you can't catch a fish. So if I had to cast out those 10 proposals, and I was very kind of hesitant and intimidated to do so because I didn't think my work was good enough to be in a book. But you kind of sometimes rise to the occasion, and once I had the publisher, I still thought the paintings weren't good enough, so I painted them all over again. And looking back on them, the paintings in that first book are very primitive, and I don't think very, they're certainly not accurate, but they have kind of a maybe charming, folky quality to them. But the book is just a record of a childhood obsession with these fish, and not much more than that. But anyway, this is a painting that was in my second book of trout, Trout of the World, which I'll leave at the school if you guys want to look at it. But after I did the Trout of North America, I wanted to try to paint the trout of the rest of the world. So I started traveling to remote parts of Europe and Asia, Central Asia, looking for more trout. And the trout became kind of a vehicle for me to travel to remote parts of the world that I would never ever have gone to before. So this is the headwaters of the Tigris River in eastern Turkey. I wish I had a map to show you where that is, but the Tigris and Euphrates are sort of famous for being the area where human civilization kind of developed. So it's a very historical area. The Tigris River, in some stories, bubbles forth near the Tree of Life in the Garden of Eden. So the biblical story of Genesis was really wrapped up in this area. When Noah flooded the earth, Mount Ararat, which is in far eastern Turkey on the Armenian border, was the place where Noah was said to have parked the boat in the flood. And I wanted to sort of go to this area and try to catch trout there because I actually mentioned last night I proposed to go on a travel. I proposed for this travel fellowship at Yale to go to the headwaters of the Tigris and Euphrates to look for trout. I always thought it was interesting that in the biblical story that God chose a fate for land animals to flood the world that probably wouldn't affect the fish that much. So Noah didn't have to bring aquariums on the ark and have like 2 trout and 2 zebrafish or whatever. So the trout of Eden were probably still there. I'm not religious and don't particularly believe in the Genesis story is true, but it's a great story. So anyway, this is a trout from the headwaters of the Tigris River. These are trout from little island, not so little island north of mainland Japan called Hokkaido. This was in May. There was still snow on the ground. But these little fish were very similar to the native brook trout that I caught growing up as a kid. This is in Mongolia. The rental cars aren't very good there. There's not many roads either, so you just sort of pick a place on the map and drive to it. This is a Mongolian boy holding a fish called a grayling. Grayling are kind of related to trout, but as I mentioned last night, even if we didn't know the language of the people where we were traveling, we being myself and the friends I traveled with, fishing was kind of this universal language that people speak around the world. Anywhere there's water, there's usually fish, and there's usually people trying to catch them. And any place we went where there were villages with kids, the kids got very excited that we were trying to look for the local fish. And sometimes they'd all dive in the pool where we were fishing, and which wasn't very helpful. Other times they'd grab my rod and run down the river, and I didn't know if he was trying to steal my rod or help me catch a fish. And I'd run after him, and they'd start pulling rocks, turning rocks over, finding little live insects. They'd store them in their mouth and then take one out and put on the hook and throw it in the river. All kinds of interesting techniques, but